While we're waiting on that, just a reminder, everyone, we do have our code of conduct, which I will paste into the chat, the link to it, and contact us at galeconferencesupport@googlegroups.com with any concerns you may have. I just received the slides, so let me get those. It says verify my identity. Okay, let's see. Put in my email. It wants a code now. Sorry, guys. Apparently I need a code to access it now. Here we go. Get that code. Okay. One more moment, everyone. I apologize. Okay. Let's see.
Yes, we are adding to the authenticity. Yes. Thank you, Carrie.
Okay, we're getting close. And now it's wanting me to sign into Microsoft. Okay, let's see. From beginning, let's see. Okay, so now I have it pulled up on my computer. Let me see if I can share it properly and see what happens. Okay, can you see the slides okay? Are there boxes?
There are no boxes.
Yay. Okay, so it all looks okay to everyone, yes? Okay, seeing thumbs up in class. So you're just gonna have to let me know when to click over to the new slides, but real quick, the introductory remarks. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Bree Kirsch, and I'll be the moderator for this session titled Teaching in the Age of AI with Authenticity and Vulnerability. Before we begin, remember the code of conduct that I pasted in the chat. Also, please put your questions in the chat, which will be answered at the end of the presentation. This session is being recorded. You can enable captions by clicking on the Show Captions button at the bottom of the screen. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Michael Flierl, who is the Student Learning Librarian and an Associate Professor at the Ohio State University Libraries. In his role, Michael's work and research focuses on how students can more intentionally, creatively, and ethically use information and data to learn, including AI technologies. Jane Hammons is the Teaching and Learning Engagement Librarian and an Associate Professor at The Ohio State University, and unfortunately had to miss this presentation while giving a presentation at another conference. Please join me in welcoming Michael Flierl.
Thanks so much, Bree. Appreciate it. Thanks everyone for coming. Excited to dive in. Let's get right to it. Bree, if you can advance, I think it's just an intro slide. There we are. No, that is not an AI generated image. I did go to a daguerreotype type of tintype place, and I love that. And everyone thinks it's AI generated, but it's not. So yeah, there we are. Those are email addresses. Feel free to reach out. We'd love talking about AI and teaching and learning. And this is kind of a result of an internal workshop we gave to OSU folks. Honestly, one of our best attended ones. And I think it's because a lot of people have feelings about AI, as you should. You know, most of us don't have a background in machine learning or computer science, and yet we are expected to engage with this increasingly important technology. And I don't know about y'all, but at Ohio State and a lot of other universities that I could see, there's a lot of people wanting to see the libraries advance AI initiatives. And it looks like we have someone with a raised hand. Karen, if you'd like to speak up, please do so. I don't know if you're gonna, yeah, please, go ahead. Did you have a comment?
Karen or Corrine, I'm not sure how it's pronounced. You have to unmute yourself to be able to. Okay, they put their hand down, so maybe it was an accident.
Yep, not a problem, not a problem. Okay, so today what we're gonna do, and I want plenty of time for Q&A, because I've burned enough time with other issues. I'm just going to very briefly go into what I think are some of the more important current developments in AI. Jane is going to talk about authenticity and vulnerability. Hopefully, if the audio works for her YouTube video, and then I'll discuss my kind of key takeaways in Q&A. But overall, generally speaking, we're not going to be prescriptive here. We're not trying to provide answers. In fact, we're trying to almost problematize this, or to at least highlight the complexities and honestly the emotional aspects of engaging with AI when you as an instructor, or if you're working with someone who simply don't feel competent with the technology. What are you supposed to do? How are you supposed to approach it? What's a useful way forward if you don't have a lot of technical expertise? That's kind of the goal here, and kind of the point of talking through this together. And Jane and I thought we brought kind of two different experiences and perspectives on this. And so we're trying to model what we kind of advocate for. So if you could advance, Bree, this should be hopefully rapid fire. So next slide again. Teaching in the age of AI, some things you need to know. This is from a report from the Stanford Human-Centered AI Lab or some such. You could see that AI models are kind of closing the gap on each other. There's kind of like a tier 1 and a tier 2. Again, this is from like months ago, so I don't know exactly how accurate this is today, but generally speaking, model scale continues to grow rapidly. The amount of training data required doubles every, to train these models doubles every 8 months. Power use is doubled annually. By 2030, it's anticipated generative AI power usage will be the equivalent of like what Japan will be. So that's pretty significant. It just needs more data, more energy, more training compute. Next, please. Models are also getting smaller. So this is the vertical axis here is the number of parameters, which is kind of how big or small these models are. And over time, this graph represents the size of the models able to achieve a certain score on a standardized benchmark. So what you see is functionally smaller models are getting more effective, which also means they're going to be more efficient in terms of cost, power, etc. Next, please. AI tools in society. Yeah, so some recent research is demonstrating that in offloading critical thinking tasks or creative thinking tasks, it is suggesting a diminishment in deep reflective thought processes. So there are certainly potential cognitive costs for utilizing generative AI technology. So the costs aren't just necessarily environmental, but also in terms of like what we lose in using other tools or other approaches for these tasks. Next, please. And then, right. This is a new report from Anthropic, and I think this is really worth highlighting, is the fact that many people say generative AI is like a fill-in-the-blank machine. While there's some recent research in XAI or explainable AI that Anthropic has been doing, and they're leading the initiative, they're leading the efforts in this from in terms of companies who are providing generative AI models. But what they found is that these models are, or at least the current frontier models, I think this is Claude 3.7, Claude 4.0 just got released a week or two ago. 3.7, I believe, planned ahead. So it wasn't just strictly filling in the blanks. It was trying to understand, and this is a report I highly recommend. I think it's called Tracing the Thoughts of a Language Model. And there's a lot more examples of this, including a great example of how it kind of approximates like a mathematical calculation. Basically, it just has these internal heuristics to kind of figure out the answer rather than doing the arithmetic. And this is behavior in this example of the model, quote unquote, kind of thinking ahead or planning ahead, figuring out that I wanted to rhyme rabbit with grab it and kind of working backwards from there to how to get there. So these models, some of the things, the heuristics we've been using or analogies we've been using previously don't necessarily apply to the current generation of models. Next, please. Right, and so now that's kind of the landscape we're in. Models are getting smaller. They're requiring more data, more energy, more. And we're really just kind of starting to scratch the surface of understanding what the hell's going on underneath the hood. There's still a lot we don't know about these models. And so if nothing else, I'm hoping that kind of makes everyone feel a little bit better that even if you could build these damn things, the model behaviors are variable and that we can't truly understand what's going on. We know that they're using math to accomplish these tasks, but we don't know how they're using that math. So with that, I'm hoping Jane, if this YouTube video works, on the next slide, Jane Hammons can kind of get us started. My collaborator OSU can talk about her perspective on teaching AI with authenticity and vulnerability. And I can't hear Bree, and I don't know if you got to share with audio or not. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. This is probably very likely all my fault.
Learning Engagement Librarian at The Ohio State University. I apologize that I'm not able to be there live today, but due to a scheduling mix-up on my part, I will be giving a presentation at the Will You Conference in Ontario at just about the same time as you are seeing this video. However, I do appreciate the chance to participate with you virtually. For my part of the presentation, I wanted to start off by sharing my own perspective on teaching with AI. Over the past few years, I've given several presentations on teaching with AI, often co-presenting with Michael, and I've been involved in different groups at Ohio State working to provide resources or to develop guidelines around teaching with AI. But I have to admit that I'm still not really very comfortable in using AI myself. I have fairly limited technical knowledge about how AI works, and it's just not often the first thing that comes to mind for me when I have a teaching task or any other type of task to complete. When I do tend to use AI, it's often more for fun tasks, such as creating images, than it is for serious work. It's still often a surprise to me when I work with colleagues in the libraries or other units in the university who very quickly turn to AI for certain types of teaching tasks or work tasks. To be honest, if it was up to me, I probably would prefer to just ignore AI entirely. However, as a librarian who has devoted her career to teaching information literacy, I've come to develop the perspective that I can't just ignore AI. AI is part of the information environment. Our students are using AI to find and create and share information. And because of that, from my perspective, I feel I have to make an effort to engage with AI, even if it would not be my personal preference. I'm sharing this background because I want to talk a little bit more about what it means to teach AI with authenticity and vulnerability. And to do this, I want to talk a little bit more about what it means to teach with authenticity and vulnerability in general. I did a little bit of research into the concept of authenticity in teaching, and although I am by no means an expert, I did want to share a little about what I have found. I like this quote to start the conversation, that we cannot be authentic in teaching and ignore or not care about our students, for that is what teaching is. Students, however, what does it mean to be authentic in teaching? Some of the factors that have been associated with authenticity in teaching include making sure that our behaviors are congruent with our words, right? So in other words, we need to practice what we preach and make sure we're not telling our students one thing and then acting differently in our own lives. It's also an important part of authenticity is being able to admit that we don't have all the answers and that we can make mistakes. Other factors that have been associated with authenticity include being candid, being sincere, not putting on a performance. So basically being on our authentic selves. However, I do want to point out that being authentic does not necessarily mean that you have to completely self-disclose everything about yourself. But it is important to think about whether or not you're putting on a performance when you are teaching. I also want to point out this idea of having a balance between interest and need. One aspect of being an authentic teacher is being truly interested in what we are teaching. So we can be our most authentic teaching self when we're really excited about what we are teaching. But it's also important to recognize that there has to be some balance there. So in some cases, we have to act in ways that are best on what we consider to be in the best interest of our students. So even if we don't find some aspect of what we're teaching particularly exciting, or we're not really interested in ourselves, we may still end up teaching it because we recognize that this is something that our students need to know. We're not being inauthentic when we do that. Authenticity in teaching can be connected to vulnerability in teaching. So as I mentioned, one of the factors that has been identified as being contributing to authenticity in teaching is being able to admit that we can make mistakes or that we don't know everything. One of the reasons that we may act in ways that are not authentic is that we may fear making ourselves vulnerable, right? This can be really difficult to do. No one likes to open up themselves to the potential pain or discomfort of admitting that we don't know something or that we struggle with something. However, being vulnerable with our students can provide a benefit to our students. It can let them know that they don't have to be perfect either, and that it's okay for them not to know something, and that it's okay for them to try something, to take risks, and maybe not be successful. Some of the ways that we can be vulnerable in our teaching is to share stories with our students, for example, of times when we struggled ourselves, or we're currently struggling, or being willing, as hard as it can be, to make it clear that we just don't know something, that I can't answer that question for you. And so, to bring this all together then, from my perspective, what it means to teach AI with authenticity and vulnerability is to not be afraid to admit if we don't have the level of expertise with AI that we may want to, or that our students may have, not being afraid to admit that we don't have all of the answers. I think that many of our students may also be feeling vulnerable when it comes to AI. So part of this may involve adopting a learning together mindset, right? We're coming in and we're going to learn about this. I am learning about this with you, right? Rather than I am teaching you about this because I'm already an expert on this. And as I mentioned, I think we need to consider that balance in terms of practicing what we preach, but also making decisions about how to incorporate AI based on what is in the best interest of our students, rather than focusing on our personal interest or disinterest in AI or the fear that we may have related to AI. To wrap up this section then, I wanted to share my key takeaways. And for me, these are that it is totally okay to feel uncomfortable with AI. It's totally okay to not have great technical knowledge about AI. But from my perspective, it's not okay to completely ignore AI, right? I want to acknowledge that many of you may have very serious and very justified ethical concerns about AI. And that definitely should impact your decision in terms of how you move forward with teaching AI. But I also think that we have to really think about what our role is and what is in the best interest of our learners. So even if we may be uncomfortable with AI ourselves, or feel that we just don't know enough to teach students about AI, is it going to be in the best interest of our students to not talk about AI or to ignore AI? Is that going to prepare them for the lives that they are going to lead after they graduate? And I want to recognize that the answer is not going to be the same for all instructors in all contexts, and I recognize that. But I do think that it's important that we reflect on, if we make a decision not to talk about AI with our students, that we are thinking about why we are making that decision. And whether or not it's based on maybe I just feel uncomfortable doing so, or maybe there are other reasons that you feel are justified for not talking about AI. But I think if it is that I'm just scared or that I'm uncomfortable, we have to think about, is that really going to be in the best interest of our students? So that's what I wanted to talk about with my section. And I wanted to go ahead and hand it back over to Michael. Thank you all very much.
As usual, Jane is concise and thoughtful. Bree, if you can advance this. So I will. Thank you. Excellent. Yeah, so I use generative AI, generally speaking, on a daily basis. I've kind of calculated this out recently. I think I have roughly between 750 and 1,000 hours of experience with generative AI. So fundamentally, a couple hours, or hour or two a day over the course of the last few years. I've consulted on AI grants with the Department of Defense. I'm part of an AI startup. I've had multiple AI speaking engagements, and I'll walk into a room of computer scientists or people with much more technical capability than I am and feel like an absolute utter novice. So I would say, relatively speaking, to many of the folks I talk with, I just have more experience, and so therefore I feel like I have a can y'all see me? Bria, I just want to make sure. Yes, and you can hear me still too, right? Yeah, okay, cool. Okay, cool. Audio came back. Long story short is um, I still feel like I only have a medium comfort level where some people without as nearly as much experience as I have think I'm this expert, and there's people who I consider to be expert that I interact with, and I feel like a utter novice that is no better than a toddler trying to type at a computer. So it's all kind of variable. It depends. Next, please, Bree. So my takeaway is I would challenge us all to consider that if AI is going to be cheaper, more embedded, easier to kind of grapple and handle with and interact with. It used to be, you need supercomputing clusters or whatever to get to advanced advanced AI systems or machine learning technologies, and now it's available through a web browser. Or there's some models that could fit on your phone locally. You don't need to connect to the internet. And so, assuming that costs go down, size goes down, but performance still maintains where it's at, I think the students that we are directly teaching today, right now, will be shaping the future of AI, not just in higher education, but as the next generation of doctors, engineers, humanists, politicians, military leaders, etc. And so I think we honestly have a responsibility to educate them holistically around AI. Another aspect that I'd like to highlight is I try to avoid using analogies. I think that's, I don't want to say necessarily intellectually lazy because I definitely still use them. It's kind of hard not to. But generative AI is also qualitatively different from other forms of AI, from other forms of compute. And so I try to avoid metaphors because it kind of makes it simplistic and reductive. And I'm kind of in line with Jane's thinking. I think we want to avoid that and embrace the complexity and ambiguity. We don't always have to come down with a hard answer. In fact, I think it's a benefit to our students, for ourselves to model our vulnerability and our lack of knowledge and the complexity of the issues at hand. And then which provides an example to model scholarly inquiries we want to see in our students. And then also, I argue that we really do need to understand some of the fundamentals of the technology. So why is it that why are we given a thumbs up, thumbs down for some models? Well, that's working through back propagation to train to strengthen or weaken certain relationships within the model's parameters or those artificial neurons, right? Or there's other fundamental questions. How come some models allow you to be, more precise or more creative? Well, that's due to a setting called temperature that the companies kind of can tweak behind the scenes to make the word content more, or like the words it outputs, more variable or more deterministic. And there's a lot of small ways like temperature that AI companies use to kind of tweak the output. It's not just purely deterministic from math. There's some art along with the science that these models, these companies interact or change the model with. So, okay, next, please, Bree. Yeah, so that's basically it. I'm super happy we got plenty of time for Q&A here, because that's really what I look forward to the most. But fundamentally, I think if we as librarians, as educators, if we do have feelings of vulnerability and not feeling up to the task, that could be a benefit. That might be something to leverage. That might model for students the type of complexity we want them to have around this complex topic, to model that it's okay not to have all the answers, that in fact there's an opportunity to learn with your students, and there might be a host of benefits as a result for approaching that. So with that, I will hopefully have like 15 minutes for Q&A. Please just start to throw your questions, comments, concerns, feelings, what have you, into the chat. But I guess I want to challenge everyone here to think differently about AI, or to consider the implications of their educational practices, and maybe why you don't need to feel like an expert, why your feelings of vulnerability may be a positive, and how to work with others to enable this type of education or educational outcomes that we want. Okay, let's see here. Some questions already. Working with AI is a major part of my job, but I'm struggling to temper expectations. And by the way, thank you so much, Bree, for managing all the slide BS. I really appreciate it. There are just too many apps, too many models, and they change so quickly for any of us to be the expert. Precisely, Deborah. And in fact, I think we as academic librarians have more experience than most others that we interact with, in changing technology, in changing expectations, media, et cetera, et cetera. And so, why not us? Why can't we lead the way to say, yeah, I don't know, I can't make heads or tails of this new deep thinking model. That's very different from these previous AI iterations. How should we approach that? I don't know. Let's figure it out. Let's work together on it. I think we have experience and expertise to bring to bear on a lot of these questions if we just kind of give ourselves permission to. Okay, let's see here. I'm gonna go through the chat.
It looks like the next question I'm seeing is from Lorraine. In some ways, it disappeared. There it goes. I feel like we librarians are in a similar situation today as I lost it again. It keeps bouncing around. Sorry. There it goes. As our former colleagues were in the 1980s with the advent of the OPAC. This article by Plutchak on the satisfied and inept end user from MedReference Services Quarterly, it looks like, discussed the issues related to end users performing their own searches. Am I alone in feeling that AI is the same sort of sea change?
I mean, why not? In one sense, yes. And I mean, generative AI, in one sense, is a lot like other previous disruptive technologies. The internet fundamentally altered the trajectory of librarianship. I don't think there's a way around it, and altered the world as we know it. There's, before the internet, thank God I was born before the internet and had like a regular childhood without it. Otherwise, I would have been at home playing video games, and the world out of it, right? And I think in one sense, generative AI is going to be like that. It's likely going to impact jobs. You already see it impacting the military with autonomous drones, Ukraine, impacting politics, misinformation. I mean, art, the humanities, coding. Microsoft just laid off a bunch of people, I think. And Anthropic said they expect AI to write most of their code in the months or years to come. And so it's fundamentally disruptive in one sense, like a lot of other technologies, but in another sense, it is fundamentally different. It's a different type of artificial intelligence than we've ever seen before. It's a technology we still don't fundamentally understand. Experts cannot articulate why models behave in certain ways over certain time. I'm not making it up. I saw a study that certain models, this was like probably a year at least ago, so maybe this is different, but models tended to output things, shorter outputs in summer as opposed to like the winter months. And the best they can make sense of it was it internalized that humans don't write as much in the summer months than the winter months. We don't know. There's so much we don't know. And so for you, for any individual to have feelings of vulnerability, is that should be expected, that should be anticipated. That's not something that we need to shoo away. In fact, I think it's something we should embrace, this ambiguity, this complexity, this tension. I think we often want to resolve it, but in fact, it's best if we try to keep that alive.
Next question is from Amelia. Is it really a guarantee that these models will become cheaper in the future, considering they continue to require more data and power use?
Excellent question. So currently, I would argue yes, and I'll give a couple reasons why. We're just starting to get hardware for these models. For years, these models have been trained on GPUs that were fundamentally for video games, for parallel processing. Now we're starting to create hardware for specifically designed for this type of software application. So there's that. There's also all the incentive in the world for these models to become cheaper because the AI companies make a lot more profit. If they become a lot more efficient, if they could get the same type of quality outputs, but with a smaller model, that means they get to keep more in profit. Lastly, I'll note the cost of tokens, the cost of producing content output from models has decreased steadily over the past year. I think OpenAI just today or yesterday decreased the cost of their O3 model by like 80%. Google Gemini's was already 50 to 80% cheaper. And so hardware-wise, history-wise, even just current trajectory, it does seem like the models are getting cheaper, even accounting for the drastic increase necessary in resources and energy. So that's where I would put my money. Of course, there's absolutely no guarantees in AI world, but that's my best guess.
And in response to one of your earlier verbal points, Leah said, such a good point. Maybe we can have habits of mind that can help, thinking of the many changing resources over many years.
Yeah, so preview for the closing keynote is where I'm going to argue against kind of a framework approach, which has typically worked for previous information landscapes or previous information literacy or information approaches for professionals, and more towards an orientation approach where we can't predict the future. This technology is changing so quickly. It is qualitatively different than other forms of technology. And therefore, we need to maintain this open mind. We need to maintain this flexibility. And so we need to avoid structure and ossified ways of looking at things and rather adapt as things go forward, because this technology is likely to continue to evolve and change.
And Jeff asks, given your significant experience learning and evaluating applications, what kind of activities and assignments would you recommend for a general audience of undergraduate students to learn the potential and limits of generative AI?
Great question. I would highly suggest them. There's a lot of ways. In my experience, students love critiquing things in general. And so you can have them, I like have them comparing and contrasting things. So you can do something, write a poem, write an email, whatever. Have the students do X, have the model do X, compare and contrast. Have the students critique the model's output on X. You could have students try to find ways or find tasks the AI model is poor at. Try to identify what, something that the AI models aren't good at. You can have a competition for who can write the best prompt to accomplish a task. I've seen that, and that's been kind of interesting. And then everyone can kind of share their prompts together, and then you have a whole list of prompts, and you can demonstrate the different ways to approach prompting, the different outputs, compare and contrast. So I think you, have to get students to use it or users to use it. You just need to use it. I don't think there's fundamentally any way getting around that. But then two, you need metacognition. You need them to reflect on the experience, to document it, and you need to task them to critique it, to exercise their own critical thinking skills. And then in my experience, once they've done that, they start to become very critical of model output. They start to like look for it. They have to differentiate between Google finding known information and generative AI, which is creating information.
The next question, there were several comments in the chat, but the next question, it looks like, yes, but what happens if those principles are fundamentally antithetical to our profession?
Interesting. Which principles? I'm sorry,
Oh, they might be referring to somebody's comment. I can't tell.
well, I will say this. I think it is a failure of the imagination for us not to advocate for forms of AI that are in alignment with our professional values. I think there's going to be increasing opportunities for us to create our own versions of generative AI systems or our own machine learning algorithms. And in so doing, we can advocate for it to be aligned, for there to be a human in the loop, for it to be human centered, to advance our goals and to live within our values, to be transparent and explainable. I think we can advocate for that even if we're not very comfortable truly knowing what the technology is. But I do think that is absolutely within the realm of possibility. I know at Ohio State, we're using machine learning algorithms. I don't think it's technically generative AI, but maybe a little, and I should say in a sense, but to provide alt text to like hundreds of thousands of PDFs. For me, that is a fantastic application. We're meeting accessibility guidelines. We're making documents more discoverable and accessible to students, to people who use screen readers, and we're doing it at we would not have been able to pay for that, for humans to do that. I think, and generally speaking, for what we can tell, it's been pretty accurate. So I think that's a win-win for us. And I think that's an example of an AI use case that's kind of in alignment with our values and advances our values.
Great. And here comes another question. What AI tools are you using for accessibility checking?
Accessibility checking. I typically use built-in tools. So sorry, and some of those are powered by AI applications or some type of AI, but yeah, I don't have others.
And Beth asks, how do you respond to faculty who refuse to allow student use of AI?
Yeah, so that's interesting. Our newish provost here just stated this past week or last week that all OSU students will be AI fluent in their major. Don't know what the hell that means. Don't know what that looks like. I think that's in one sense fair, provided you could justify it. I also think it's important to note that the genie's out of the bottle, that a lot of assignments, especially written ones, but not even necessarily that, also math ones, there's a whole bunch of things that generative AI models can now basically get a passing grade for in college. It's becoming easier and cheaper for students to use AI for coursework. And so you have to like really think hard about what you want to do. It's going to be harder to detect as well. So I think you have to think through the implications of that. That being said, I think it's absolutely appropriate for many assignments in a specific course for a specific reason not to use AI. But I think you also need to engage students because right now they are confused, they are frustrated, they are anxious about this, not only about higher education or whatever, but also in their future careers, about academic misconduct that could get them kicked out of college, et cetera, et cetera. I think you need to engage. The answer is not disengagement, even if you're not using it. The answer is engagement and working in collaboration with your students.
And Amy was wondering, do you teach courses over a semester or during one-shots? And they can integrate small segments that display authenticity or vulnerability, but there isn't a lot of time to develop trust and psychological safety for students to experiment and fail as they learn.
Yeah, and so I think modeling that in whatever ways you can are useful. I do teach like workshops, co-teach workshops with colleagues in our first year student success series on generative AI. And to be frank, it's just not much time. I really think it's quite limited what you could do with such a complex topic, with such an emerging technology in 45 minutes, 60 minutes, 75 minutes. I think we'll get way more bang for our buck embedding this into curricula.
Okay. And this is kind of a big question, but Thomas asked, so what value does education fundamentally have then for us?
Yes, yes. In one sense, this is fundamentally new. In another sense, not so much. I mean, we've had code bases or code repositories in computer science. Like we've dealt with that. Calculators exist, yeah, we still have math education. But at the same time, this is also different. And I think that is a question. Fundamentally, I think come fall, the fall semester, in most schools, in most universities, most assignments that aren't basically targeted to avoid AI use, you'll be able to complete it and get a passing grade using generative AI. And so what I'm advocating for in our like GE or general education like launch class is to task students to reflect on what the hell they're like, why do they want to grind and go through all the extra work themselves when an AI could do it for you? What are the intrinsic motivation to learn has to like we have to locate that to within, or we have to get them to reflect on what the hell they're here for. And fundamentally, I don't think there's a way to prevent students from using AI or to use an AI that cannot be detected. I think that's more likely than not. And so we need to kind of change fundamentally our conception, our orientation to this. Are we just here to get them a piece of paper? Are we here to educate the next generation of democratic citizens? I argue the latter, and therefore I argue that we need students who can articulate complex, nuanced understandings of AI in a variety of disciplinary contexts.
Okay, and how do you feel about users citing their use of AI, such as through the AID framework? And there are some links included there.
Not familiar with the AID framework. I would just say, generally speaking, I think transparency is paramount for generative AI use in education, or maybe just writ large for scholarship as well. So any type of framework in which transparency is emphasized, I'm all for.
Okay, and time for one more question, it looks like, from Jenny. We've seen cases in the media where students are being punished for using AI to complete assignments, severe to the point where they are expelled or punished. Do you feel this is part of why students feel afraid or vulnerable when it comes to AI and its use in education?
Yes, fundamentally, yes. And I think we need to avoid students feeling afraid of using this tool. We need them to engage with it in sophisticated ways. We need students or work colleagues to be able to use it effectively and to justify its use. That's what we need. That's, we want to educate not just this generation of AI, but we want people who can interact in sophisticated ways with the next generation of generative AI.
Okay, well, we are out of time, but
That went
thank you
quick,
so
Bree.
much, Michael, for your presentation and your expertise. And if anybody wants to continue the conversation, you're welcome to do so in the Discord channel. Michael, are you able to access the Discord channel? Have you tried to do that yet?
I haven't yet, but I'm pretty sure I can.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, if you need help with that, let me know. But if anyone wants to continue the conversation in Discord, feel free. And again, thank you so much, Michael. We're seeing lots of clapping, and thank you.
Yeah. Thanks
And
all.
I'm
Take
gonna
care.
end the session now.